Deep in the Alaskan wilderness, a cry for help echoes through the forest. A lone woman discovers a helpless bear cub. Tangled in wire, what she doesn't know is that this decision to save the cub will lead her to an encounter with its furious mother and a moment of raw emotion that no one could prepare for a story that will test your ideas of courage, compassion, and the bonds that transcend species. Before we begin, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that inspire and move you. Sarah Dawson gripped the steering wheel of her battered Jeep the radio, humming softly in the background as the Alaskan wilderness unfolded before her. She wasn't just here for another photography project. This was an escape, a desperate attempt to find peace DE after losing her sister to a sudden illness. 3 months ago, the open forest had always been her solace, and she hoped its silence would dull her grief. The sun was low, casting golden light through towering pines when a sound pierced the air, a shrill, desperate cry that seemed out of place in the serene wilderness. Sarah slammed on the brakes, her heart racing. As she strained to hear it again, another cry, sharper this time, sent adrenaline coursing through her veins. Stepping out of the Jeep, she grabbed her camera bag and followed the sound, her boots crunching on frost-kissed leaves. As she moved closer, the cries became louder and more frantic. It wasn't human, but it was unmistakably distressed. When Sarah reached the clearing, the sight stopped her in her tracks. A tiny grizzly cub, its fur matted with mud and blood, thrashed wildly in a crude wire snare. It looked no older than a few months, its small frame trembling with exhaustion. Sarah's chest tightened. She'd read about these. Traps left by poachers or illegal loggers who cared little about what they captured. The cub's dark eyes locked on hers wide with terror. "Oh no," Sarah whispered, dropping her bag. Her instincts screamed at her to run where there was a cub. There was almost certainly a mother, but the sight of the cub struggling against the wire overwhelmed her fear. Sarah crouched a few feet away, speaking softly. "Hey, little one, it's okay. I'm here to help the cub," let out a pitiful cry but didn't thrash. As violently when she edged closer, she pulled out a pair of leather gloves and a small knife from her bag. Every move felt like a gamble, but she couldn't leave the animal like this. Her hands trembled as she carefully began cutting the wire, wincing. When the cub whimpered in pain, blood oozed from deep gashes where the metal had dug into its flesh. The process took what felt like an eternity, but finally, the last piece of wire fell away. Sarah exhaled shakily and sat back on her heels. The cub didn't move, its body limp from exhaustion. She inspected its injuries as best as she could. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We'll figure this out." Just as she wrapped her jacket around the cub, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the clearing. Sarah's blood turned cold. Slowly, she turned her head, emerging. From the shadows, muscles taut and eyes blazing, was the mother G. Sarah froze, her breath caught in her throat. The mother grizzly stood at the edge of the clearing, her massive form dwarfing everything around her. Her fur bristled in the fading sunlight, her dark eyes fixed on Sarah with a fiery intensity. The growl deepened, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the air. The cub in Sarah's arms let out a weak cry, and the mother took a single, heavy step forward. Instinct screamed at Sarah to drop the cub and run, but she knew better. Turning her back would be suicide, and leaving the injured cub unthinkable easy. Sarah whispered, her voice trembling as she slowly rose to her feet. She kept her movement slow and deliberate, cradling the cub in her jacket. The mother took another step, her growl rising in pitch. Sarah's legs felt like jelly, her body screaming for escape, but she forced herself to stay still. She knew the rules: don't run, don't look threatening, and don't panic. But what now? She thought frantically. How could she convince a grieving, protective mother bear that she meant no harm? "I'm trying to help," Sarah murmured, though she knew the bear couldn't understand. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Your baby was caught. I couldn't leave it." The mother bear stopped sniffing the air. Her nose twitched and her gaze darted to the cub in Sarah's arms for a moment. Sarah saw something that almost resembled recognition or maybe desperation. The cub whimpered again, its tiny paw reaching toward the larger bear. The mother huffed a short, sharp sound and took 2 more steps closer. Sarah's heart pounded in her ears. She glanced around the clearing, her mind racing for an escape route. The trees were too far, and there was no cubbo that could shield her from the bear if it charged her. Only hope was to de-escalate the situation. "I'm putting it down," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She crouched, slowly, her knees wobbling as she gently set the cub on the ground. It let out a weak cry, its injured leg shaking as it tried to move. The mother bear stopped growling, her massive head tilting slightly as she watched Sarah straightened. Raising her hands in a gesture of surrender, she took a cautious step back, her eyes never leaving. "The bear there, see, your baby's safe." The mother moved forward, her powerful legs crushing the underbrush beneath her. Sarah held her breath, every muscle in her body tense. The bear sniffed the cub, her massive nose brushing against its tiny body. The cub let out a soft whimper, and the mother nuzzled it gently, a low rumble vibrating in her chest. Sarah exhaled shakily for a fleeting moment. She thought she was safe, but then the mother's gaze snapped back to her and the growl returned deeper, more menacing. Sarah's mind raced. The mother was still on edge, likely interpreting Sarah's proximity as a threat. Slowly, she began to back away. Her palms still raised her foot, caught on a root, and she stumbled, her heart lurching, as the bear took a step forward, teeth bared. "I'm leaving, Sarah," cried her voice, cracking. "I'm leaving." "Okay," she scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting toward her camera bag still lying in the clearing. There was no time to grab it. She turned and walked backward, keeping her eyes on the bear, who now stood protectively over her cub. When Sarah was finally far enough to feel the tension ease, she turned and sprinted through the forest. Her lungs burned, her legs trembling as she pushed herself to move, faster than she ever had. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf felt like the bear charging after her. She didn't stop running until she reached the Jeep. Throwing herself inside, she slammed the door and locked at her chest. Heaving as she gasped for air, the forest outside was silent again, as if the encounter had never happened. But as Sarah's hands shook, her heart pounding in her chest. Looking back toward the clearing, she whispered to herself, "What the hell was I thinking?" Sarah sat in her Jeep, staring blankly at the dirt road ahead. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, but she couldn't bring herself to start the engine. The encounter with the bear replayed in her mind on an endless loop. The cub's cries, the mother's growls, and the crushing weight of her own fear. "I should have left," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the quiet hum of the forest outside. But deep down, she knew she couldn't have done it. Leaving that cub tangled in suffering wasn't something she was capable of, even if it meant putting herself in harm's way. Her camera bag, the thought struck her like a jolt. She'd left it behind in the clearing along with weeks of work and her only means of income. The memory cards inside held her latest shots, including a rare photo series of migrating moose. She had tracked for days without them. Her trip would be a financial disaster. But going back, the thought was paralyzing. The mother bear was likely still there protecting her cub. Returning could be a death sentence. Sarah leaned back in her seat. Closing her eyes, she could still hear the cub's weak cries, the raw desperation in its eyes, and the mother's growl, that guttural warning, still sent shivers down her spine. She opened her eyes. Staring at the forest, every instinct told her to leave to cut her losses and get out of there. Instead, she grabbed her first aid kit from the glove box. Sarah moved cautiously through the forest, her senses heightened to every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig. The light was fading, and the temperature had begun to drop, making her acutely aware of how vulnerable she was. Each step felt heavier than the last, her nerves screaming at her to turn back. The clearing came into view, and she froze. The mother bear was still there. Sarah ducked behind a tree, her breath catching in her throat. As she peered out, the bear stood over the cub, licking its wounds with the gentleness of a creature far removed from the fierce predator Sarah had faced earlier. The sight stirred something deep within her, understanding of the mother's desperation, her fierce determination to protect her child at all costs. Sarah hesitated, weighing her options. She couldn't risk another confrontation, but the cub needed help. Its injuries were worse than she had realized, and while the mother's care was tender, it wasn't enough without intervention. The cub's chances of survival were slim. She fumbled in her bag, pulling out a small pack of antiseptic wipes and bandages. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. Slowly, she stepped into the clearing, her hands held up to show she wasn't a threat. The mother bear's head snapped up her growl. Reverberating through the air, Sarah stopped, her heart hammering in her chest. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, her voice shaking. "I just want to help." The bear took a step toward her, her massive frame towering over Sarah, but this time the growl wasn't as aggressive. It was a warning, not a threat. Sarah crouched, moving as slowly as she could. She set the first aid kit on the ground and backed away. Her Palms open, the bear hesitated, her dark eyes darting between Sarah and the kit for what felt like an eternity. Nothing happened. Then the bear huffed a deep, short sound that Sarah took as acknowledgement. She watched as the bear nudged the kit with her nose, her cub watching weakly from the ground. Sarah exhaled her shoulders, sagging in relief. She took a step back, then another, until she was at the edge of the clearing. The bear didn't follow back in the Jeep Sarah collapsed into, her seat, her body trembling. She stared at the forest where the shadows were growing longer. "I don't know if I did the right thing," she whispered, her voice breaking. But even as tears welled in her eyes, she felt a strange sense of peace. Sometimes she thought doing the right thing wasn't about certainty. It was about compassion, even when the outcome was unclear. The drive back to her cabin felt heavier than ever before. The tension from the encounter still gripped Sarah, but so did something else, an unshakable worry for the cub. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, the mother bear nudging the first aid kit, the cub's trembling body, its injuries too severe for any wild animal to heal on its own by the time she reached her small rustic cabin on the outskirts of the forest night. Had fallen, the cabin was quiet, illuminated only by the soft glow of a single lamp. Sarah tried to settle into her routine boiling water for tea, unpacking her supplies, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The guilt gnawed at her. She had done what she could, but was it enough? She flipped open her laptop, intending to review her photos. But the empty memory card slot brought her back to reality. All her work was still in that camera bag. Back in the clearing, the thought of returning made her stomach churn, but there was no alternative. Her livelihood depended on those photos. As she stared at the screen, her phone buzzed. It was Liz, her best friend and a park ranger with years of experience in Alaskan wildlife. "Hey, Sarah, Liz's voice crackled through the poor reception. "How's the trip?" Sarah hesitated. "It's been eventful," she said, carefully not sure how much to share. "I had a run-in with a bear today." Liz laughed. "Softly, you're in Alaska. That's bound to happen. It was different." Sarah said, her tone somber. She recounted the encounter. The cub, the snare, the mother. Liz's reaction was immediate. "Sarah, you need to report this. Traps like that are illegal. And if poachers are operating in that area, it's serious." "I know," Sarah replied, "but right now I'm more worried about that." "Cub, its injuries were bad, Liz. I left my first aid kit, but I don't know if it's enough." There was a long pause before Liz responded, "You did the right thing by helping, but wild animals are resilient. They survive. Things we can't imagine still. If that trap was set by poachers, it's likely there are more. You need to be careful." Sarah thanked Liz and hung up her heart heavier than before. She couldn't shake the image of the cub from her mind. Her gut told her it wouldn't survive without more help, but interfering further felt reckless. The line between compassion and danger was growing blurry. The next morning, Sarah woke. Before dawn, unable to sleep, the forest outside her cabin was cloaked in mist, the air crisp and quiet. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't live with herself. If the cub didn't make it, she packed her bag carefully, antiseptic bandages, food, and a small water bottle if she encountered the bears. Again, she wouldn't get another chance. Her plan was simple: retrieve her camera bag and leave the supplies where the mother bear might use them. The hike back to the clearing felt longer than before. Every snap of a branch and rustle of leaves made her jump her eyes, darting to the shadows. She carried a canister of bear spray, her fingers never leaving its trigger. When she reached the clearing, her heart sank. The mother bear and cub were still there, but something was wrong. The cub was lying on its side, barely moving its breathing, shallow. The mother bear paced nervously around it, letting out soft grunts. Sarah's chest tightened. She knew the cub's injuries had worsened. The mother bear couldn't do anything more, and the realization hit her like a wave. The cub was dying. She set her bag down at the edge of the clearing and crouched low. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, softly, her voice trembling. The mother bear froze, her massive head swinging towards Sarah. Her growl was louder, this time more threatening. Sarah didn't move. She opened the bag slowly, showing its contents, food, water, and medical supplies. "Please," she whispered, "I just want to help the mother bear." Stepped closer, her growl rumbling through the clearing. Sarah's pulse pounded, but she didn't back away. She placed the supplies on the ground, then retreated several steps. Her hands raised, the mother sniffed the bag cautiously. Before nudging it open with her nose, she pawed at the supplies, her growl fading as she focused on the contents. Sarah watched in awe as the mother pulled out the bandages, her massive claws surprisingly gentle. As she nudged them toward the cub, tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She didn't know if the supplies would save the cub, But she had done all she could. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat at her cabin, small wooden table staring out the window as the wind rustled the trees. The image of the cub, so frail and weak, haunted her. The mother bear's instinctive care was remarkable, but it wasn't enough to heal the wounds left by the cruel snare. She had left supplies, but doubts weighed at her. Was it too late? Had her decision to interfere only prolonged the cub's suffering? She knew wild animals were resilient, as Liz had said, but the cub wasn't just another wild animal to Sarah anymore. She felt responsible, bound to its survival in a way that made her chest ache by morning. Sarah had made up her mind she couldn't leave things as they were. If the cub had any chance at surviving, it needed real medical attention, and that meant taking the cub out of the wild, a decision that could cost her dearly. Transporting a wild animal, especially a bear, was illegal without proper permits, and doing so could attract heavy fines or even jail time. But the thought of doing nothing was worse. The drive back to the clearing was tense. Her Jeep bouncing along the uneven dirt road, her mind replayed worst-case scenarios: the mother bear attacking the cub, not surviving the trip, or authorities accusing her of animal cruelty instead of understanding her intentions. When she reached the clearing, her heart pounded. She parked a safe distance away and approached on foot, clutching her pack with trembling hands. The clearing was quiet. The soft morning light filtering through the trees, she spotted the mother bear immediately, her hulking frame curled protectively around the cub. Sarah stopped at the edge of the clearing, and her breath catching in her throat. The cub wasn't moving its chest, rose and fell in. Shallow, uneven breaths. The mother bear turned her head, fixing Sarah with a piercing stare. "Please," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking, "I just want to help." For a moment, it felt like time stood still. The bear stared at her unblinking, as if weighing Sarah's intentions. Then, with a low huff, the mother bear rose and took a step back, her gaze never leaving. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she realized what the mother was doing. She was letting her approach. Sarah moved slowly, her hands shaking as she knelt beside the cub. Its fur was matted with dirt and dried blood, its small body trembling with each breath. She carefully placed a blanket over it, murmuring softly to keep herself calm. "I've got you," she whispered, though her voice was shaky. "You're going to be okay." She lifted the cub, gently cradling it against her chest as she stood. The mother bear let out a low, mournful sound, and Sarah froze. She turned to face the bear, meeting her. "Gaze, I promise," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll do everything I can to bring your baby back." The mother bear didn't move. Sarah stepped backward, the cub heavy in her arms, until she reached the edge of the clearing. When she turned, and hurried toward the Jeep, she could feel the mother bear's eyes on her the entire way back. At her cabin, Sarah placed the cub on a makeshift bed of blankets and began cleaning its wounds with trembling hands. The gashes on its leg were deep and its breathing was labored. She fed Ed a mixture of warm water and honey, hoping the sugar would give it enough energy to recover hours passed in. Anxious silence as Sarah worked tirelessly, cleaning, wrapping, and checking for signs of infection. The cub stirred weakly, letting out a soft cry that broke her heart by nightfall. The cub's breathing had steadied, but his condition was still fragile. Sarah sat beside it, her hand resting gently on its small frame. "You're a fighter," she whispered. "I can see it in you. Just hold on a little longer." Her phone buzzed. It was Liz again. "Sarah, what's going on?" Liz asked, her tone sharp with concern. I brought the cub back to my cabin." Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end. "You know, what you've done is illegal, right?" Liz said. "Finally. If Fish and Wildlife finds out—" "I know," Sarah interrupted, "but it was dying, Liz. I couldn't just leave it." "What was I supposed to do?" Liz sighed heavily. "Okay." She said, "But you're in over your head. That cub needs professional care. I can call someone I trust, no questions asked, but you have to promise to let them handle it." Sarah hesitated, glancing at the cub. Its tiny body was still its breathing, shallow but steady. "Okay," she said finally, "call them." The next morning, Sarah paced the small kitchen of her cabin, her eyes flicking between the clock and the fragile cub, resting in a nest of blankets by the fireplace. Liz had promised to send help, but hours had passed with no sign of anyone. The air felt heavy with tension, and every passing moment deepened Sarah's fear that she had acted too late. The cub stirred weakly, letting out a soft, plaintive cry. Sarah rushed to its side, her heart aching at its vulnerability. "Hold on," she whispered, brushing her fingers gently over its head. "Help is coming. You just have to hold on." Her words felt hollow. She wasn't sure if the cub could survive much longer. Its wounds were clean, but the trauma and blood loss had taken a toll. Its breaths were shallow, and its small frame barely moved outside. The sound of an approaching vehicle broke the tense silence. Sarah ran to the window and saw a rugged pickup truck pulling into her driveway. Relief flooded her as Liz climbed out, followed by a tall man in his late 40s wearing a jacket with the logo of a wildlife rehabilitation center. Sarah met them at the door, her emotions bubbling over. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice shaking. "Where's the cub?" the man asked briskly by the fireplace. Sarah replied, stepping aside to let him in. The man moved with practiced efficiency, kneeling beside the cub and examining it with gentle hands. Liz stood nearby, her expression a mix of concern and quiet support. "It's critical," the man said after a moment. He glanced at Sarah. "You did the right thing cleaning the wounds, but this cub is in rough shape. We need to get it to the center immediately. It'll need IV fluids and antibiotics if it has any chance of surviving." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "Can I come with you?" The man hesitated. "It's against protocol, but considering the circumstances," he sighed. "All right, but you need to follow our rules and stay out of the way once we get there." The drive to the wildlife center was tense and silent. Sarah sat in the back seat, her eyes fixed on the small carrier holding the cub. Its faint breathing was the only sound she could hear, each shallow inhale and exhale a reminder of how precarious its condition was. When they arrived, a team of veterinarians was waiting. They whisked the cub into an examination room, leaving Sarah and Liz in a sterile waiting area. Hours passed. Sarah couldn't sit still, pacing back and forth as the minutes dragged on. Liz tried to reassure her, but Sarah's mind was a storm of worry. She replayed every moment in the forest, wondering if she had made the right decisions or if she had simply delayed the inevitable. Finally, the door to the examination room opened and the veterinarian stepped out. His expression was calm but serious. "The cub is stable for now," he said. "We've started IV fluids and antibiotics. The leg wounds were severe, but there's no infection yet, which is a good sign. The next 48 hours will be critical." Sarah let out a shaky breath, her hands gripping the edge of the chair she had finally forced herself to sit in. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The veteran Aran nodded weck. "Do everything we can, but wild animals are unpredictable, even with the best care. There are no guarantees." That night, Sarah stayed at the center, unable to bring herself to leave. She sat outside the recovery room, watching through a small window as the cub lay on a padded table surrounded by monitors. Its tiny chest rose and fell steadily, and for the first time in days, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Liz joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You did good, Sarah," she said softly. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know. What if I made it worse? What if the mother Liz placed a hand on her shoulder?" "Stop. You gave that cub a chance it wouldn't have had. Otherwise, that's what matters." They sat in silence while the weight of the experience settling over them. "Do you think the mother bear will be okay?" Sarah asked finally. Liz hesitated. "She's strong. Sheck survive, but she'll know the cub is gone. Bears grieve. Sarah, just like we do." The thought pierced Sarah's heart. She had saved the cub, but at what cost? The image of the mother bear standing in the clearing, watching as Sarah carried her cub away, was etched into her memory. "I wish there was a way to tell her," Sarah murmured, her voice thick with emotion, "to let her know her baby's safe." Liz didn't have an answer. 2 days passed in a haze of anxious waiting. The wildlife center staff worked tirelessly, monitoring the cub's progress, and wiped her tears, a deep sense of peace washing over her. She had done everything she could, and the cub was back where it belonged. "This is why we do what we do," Liz said. Softly, Saw nodded, her heart full. "Sometimes you just have to trust the wild," she said, "and hope it trusts you back." As the bears disappeared into the forest, Sarah wiped her tears, a deep sense of peace washing over her. She had done everything she could, and the cub was back where it belonged. "This is why we do what we do," Liz said softly. Sarah nodded, her heart full. "Sometimes you just have to trust the wild," she said, "and hope it trusts you back." If this story touched your heart, remember that every act of kindness, big or small, can make a difference. Sarah's journey reminds us of the courage it takes to follow your instincts and the compassion that connects us all. What would you have done in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story inspired you, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves heartfelt stories about the wild. Together, we can spread messages of hope, courage, and connection.